Welcome to Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Good morning, Houston. How are you guys doing this morning? Let me give a something in the background. Happy Father's Day to all our great fathers out there who celebrated yesterday. I want to wish you a happy Father's Day. Howard, happy Father's Day to you as well, sir. Van Beber, happy Father's Day to you as well. How you guys doing out there in the studio?
Well, we're doing pretty good, Egberto. I managed to wake up with a pulse this morning, so I guess I'm okay.
Great.
Good
I'm
morning.
glad to hear
Good
that.
morning, Egberto.
Good morning, Senor Jacques. Jacques, what's the statement for this morning?
Well, I've got a little quote from somebody.
Okay.
Okay. We need the courage to face the truth about what we are doing in the world and act responsibly to change it. And this was a quote by Daniel Ellsberg.
Who died?
You know what he did.
Yes.
He did much the same thing that Edward Snowden and Bradley Chelsea Manning are doing today. And of course, they nailed them to a cross too.
Yes.
I believe that activism is, something. I believe Christ was an activist at his heart. His true mortal role in life was activism. He pissed off Pontius Pilate by speaking truth to power. And this is what Edward Snowden did and what Chelsea Manning did. They listened to their conscience and they did what they thought was the right thing. And now they're being persecuted.
And in the
I
process,
really have a lot of respect for them. Go ahead.
I am with you, brother. In the process, they likely saved a lot of lives for which they won't get credit for. You nailed it, sir. I mean, as usual, you always have something of consequence to say. Well, look, guys, we have a great program for you today. Before I get started, I want to remind you there are many ways to get in touch with us. There are many ways to listen to our programs. KPFT 90.1 FM on the dials, of course. Of course, you can go download the TuneIn from the Android and Apple stores and find KPFT and listen to it on your phone. That way, you can also go directly to our website, kpft.org, click the listen button and listen to us. You can also go to facebook.com/KPFT Houston, facebook.com/KPFT Houston to watch the show live, or you can watch it on YouTube by going to politicsdoneright.tv, politicsdoneright.tv. Subject of the day today, title of the show, Andrew Schmookler discusses dangers of American shallowness, and Libs pushback on my take on Pharma last week. I went ahead and put the article up on DailyKos, and I got some pushback. I tell you what, I have to start our interview by 15 after, but I tell you, I want to talk a little bit about the pushback that I got on Pharma. Everybody who listened to the show last week would know what I'm talking about. Those who did not listen to the show, this particular show last week, let me give a quick synopsis. There are several pharmaceutical companies, well, one in particular, Merck, now suing the United States of America because they're trying to control the prices that you pay for drugs. And of course, we all know that most of the drugs in this country are not developed by the innovation and profits that these companies generate. It is generally you, the American people, you who are driving in a car as you listen to me, you who are out there getting up in the morning about to go to the work thinking, why do I work so hard for so little? You are the ones with the taxes that you pay that's out there funding the development, the creation, the intellect that goes behind these drugs, because they are generally developed in universities or with the grants given by the NIH and other governmental agencies. So therefore, you are paying for drugs not one times, not two times, several times, three times over, because the development, its small development, goes into the from corporations. Corporations do not take risks, as they lie to you and tell you the reason why drug prices are high is because we take risks. The reason they are high is that we take risks. They do not take risks. So I got one statement that kind of irked me from one of the writers at DailyKos, which is the most progressive thing. He says, yes, well, over the top, despite the near impossibility of doing control experiments and economic systems, the recent history of both Germany and Korea show that capitalism is the hands down winner in generating prosperity seen in the lowest economic systems. But unchecked, capitalism is brutal and can create far more losers than winners, and that's where the U.S. could do much better. And as someone who knows the medical industry complex better than most, I think we need them, but they don't need to make the outrageous profits that they are doing. But what else he came out to say is that, however, capitalism is what's needed in the drug sector. In effect, that's what he's saying, right? So I responded because, generally speaking, when I put these articles out there, I don't want to get involved in discussing the article. I want an organic discussion of the article. I don't want my influence to take hold in the discussion. I want to see organically what happens, and the reason that is important is that you want to see if what you put out there, if the formation of an idea, the idea of the crowdsource, the idea of the populace in general, they make it better. Why do they make your ideas and others better? Because it's more than one mind thinking. But this one, I felt the necessity to get involved with a response. So I responded to them as follows. Those who are not in agreement come in two major spheres. In agreements with my statements on the drug industry and why there should be no pharmaceutical companies. Capitalism does not work for creating drugs. Capitalism doesn't work for medical expense, for healthcare. Capitalism doesn't work for the distribution of energy, but it does work in other places because, again, if you don't need something, you have a choice. If I don't want to buy a pizza, I can decide not to. That's why capitalism works in that field. If I don't want to buy a car, I can take the bus. If I don't want to buy an expensive car, I can buy a cheap car. But if I break my leg, I can't decide to go shopping around for the best price. If I break my leg, I can't say, I am not going to go ahead and get service. If I need drugs for my diabetes, I can't say, well, I'm going to check the best choice, and if the best choice is too expensive, I'll just do without. It does not work in places where people don't have choices. And that is what most people fail to understand when they try to use this particular structure in a lot of different scenarios. It works for some because you have choices, and the market, the fall market can then work because people have the ability. They are on the same playing field as the producers and can say, no, I will not have it, or yes, I will have it. So I responded. Those who are not in agreement come in two major spheres. Pharmaceuticals have a purpose but need to be regulated more strongly to make prices more affordable. That's what some are saying. Others are saying, with all of its flaws, capitalism is the only solution when other economic systems from around the world are compared. I disagree with those two statements completely and wholeheartedly. I disagree with them. Why? Number one, while our indoctrination would have you believe that drug companies take significant risks to create drugs and therefore their obscene profits are justified, the reality is different. And I want you to listen, I beg, in detail to what I'm going to say here. Corporations do not take real risks. Why? Most of their risks are offloaded in many forms. Drug companies don't attempt to work on a drug until universities and federal grants prove initial viability. In other words, the universities come out and they find a chemical reaction that works in a cellular form or whatever, and then the drug companies say, we can run with that because they've proven a concept. The fact that they spend more on marketing than R&D is probative. Again, drug companies spend a lot more money marketing any particular product than they spend in research and development for that product. Worse, all companies write off losses on present and future taxes, and as such, any risk is socialized. What does that mean? They talk about, well, most drugs, even though we bring it and we research it and we work with it, it doesn't go to market, so it's money loss. That's a lie. Money is never lost when the drug company's drugs fail. And why isn't money lost? Because they recover it with the tax write-off they take on their future profits. Don't let anybody not tell you the calculated math that goes behind how corporations take things out. In fact, even oil companies, they didn't put the oil into the ground, but they used to be able to take, and I think they're still able to take something known as the depletion allowance. So here's the deal. You didn't put the oil in the ground. You are extracting the oil. You are making more profits on the oil than whoever put. We should all own oil in America, but it's the oil companies who make the profit from pulling that oil out of the ground. They didn't put it there, but they get something called a depletion allowance. Or they used to. I don't know if that benefit is still there or not. I have to research that. But for decades, they got a depletion allowance. What is a depletion allowance? It says, for all the oil, given that you're taking oil out and some of it, and again, no more oil will be left, we are going to give you a credit, a tax credit, known as a depletion allowance. So you're getting a credit for something you didn't put there. As I said, corporations do not take risks. Look, I believe in free enterprise. I 100% believe in free enterprise. But capitalism, as practiced in healthcare and other industries, it is nothing more than a fraud. And I think if you define what fraud is, it is clear that if you are being ripped off for a drug, for a service, etc., you cannot call it anything other than fraud. It is nothing about it. It is nothing but antiseptic slavery, and in some instances worse, because the source of labor is no longer capital and thus disposable, as the working class has seen over the decades. What do I mean by that? When folks like myself were slaves, the only reason we were kept alive and the only reason we were cared for is because we weren't considered humans. We were considered capital. When one is considered capital in capitalism, that is what you take care of. You take care of capital above everything because that is something you've invested in. If you've invested into something, it is capital. You can't let that capital die. The only capital, the only slaves that were allowed to die are those who would infect the masses of slaves and make them revolt against the master. Remember that, folks. Slaves had to be given a level of care to maintain life because they were nothing but machines and capital, and nobody wants to get rid of their machine, their shovel. Nobody wants to get off their caterpillar that's digging the dirt, etc. You invest in that thing to make sure it can still produce for you. That we do not see better systems, that we do not see better economic systems come into the fold is that we suppress every instance around the world where it is attempted. We have been indoctrinated for too long, and we need to take the blinders off. Our economic system is working as designed. Don't ever sit down there and think, well, we can make this thing better. We can make this thing better. It's the biggest lie out there. It is working as designed. The accumulation of wealth from the masses is working as designed. The mathematical formula, and don't get me, don't misunderstand this. Capitalism and any economic system follows a mathematical formula. If stock prices go up on an average of 7% and an economy grows at an average of 2%, those who are making the economy run, the working class, the worker, their assets only accumulate on average at 2%. Those who depend on investment, their asset increases at 7-8% per year on average. Those are not my numbers. Those are the numbers that are realized, that you can see every single day of the year. That is what happens. I mean, the stock market goes up and down, but in the aggregate, it goes up. That's a mathematical formula of how things work. Worse, when it comes to taxation, the working man's assets, the working man's income is taxed at a higher rate in the aggregate than the person who invests. In other words, the person who is your master, the person who says, come to work and I'm going to tell you what to do. I own the shares in this company that makes the profit. My taxes on the appreciation of my stock. My stock appreciates because you are a good worker. My stock appreciates because you've made the money for me. And when it's time for me to pay taxes on that income that I make from your work, I pay less in taxes than you do, even though you are doing the work. You want to tell me it's not a fraud? You want to tell me that I am wrong? Please do. I would love to get a call that says, Egberto, you are full of it. That is not how it really works. Then I'd like to know, what do I have wrong? Our economic system is working as designed. As the outcomes we said we would occur are happening in real time. The outcomes are in fact happening in real time. I'm willing to have a serious and civil conversation with anyone who wants to call and talk in a civil manner and discuss this particular issue on a subsequent program. Because I think unless we are honest with all the American people, unless we are honest with how things actually work, we will continue to flail. We'll continue to be in this particular situation. Before I think I got 2 minutes or so of commentary before I run to the next subject, but I just want to get a commentary from my brother Howard in the studio.
Okay, well, you made me wake up on this one. Okay, Egberto. My comment is, well-regulated capitalism does work for most things. I was listening to your commentary about capitalism not working for the pharmaceuticals and the medical field. That is true. It doesn't, because it's something that you need immediately. It's something that will save your life or fix your life or repair a limb that's been damaged. So you don't have the time and you don't have the choice to go over shopping around for a hospital or emergency care as such. But you do have the right to go out and take a look at a car and say, okay, this car is too high. Let me go look somewhere else. You do have choices in other places, and where you have choices is where capitalism works well. That is true. So you're dead on there. No problem. Jack, what you got?
Yeah, you always talk about the commons, things that come from the commons and what the people contribute to the economy, and capitalism, unfettered capitalism being nothing more than Hogg's law, the guy with the most jack wins is really what it comes down to. And then they get to set all the rules. What Howard was talking about, a well-regulated capitalism that's fair to the people, that doesn't take advantage of the people, is what we need to be driving for. And with the way the economic model is working, I mean, they just when they find a drug that they think is going to work for them, they go ahead and promote it. And my experience with this in helping people with addiction, and I would go in and they would put them on a certain medication, and then the doctor would change, and then the medication would change, and then they're going all over the place because they're not regulated. The poor patient is the one that suffers.
Absolutely, Jack. Absolutely, Jack. Look, thank you guys. I always like to get our folks involved in the commentary. Folks, I'll try to leave a couple of minutes at the end to answer questions, but right now we must go to Dr. Andrew Schmookler on our shallowness. So here we go.
Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. We continue with our series, A Better Human Story, by the one and only Dr. Andrew Schmookler, who is a prize-winning author, former Democratic candidate for Congress in Virginia's very red Shenandoah Valley, former talk show radio host, summa cum laude graduate of Harvard University, PhD awarded with distinction in a program specifically created to accommodate his original theory explaining how civilization has developed and a frequent columnist in newspapers around the entire United States. Welcome once again, Andrew Schmookler. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing okay.
Well, last time we left, we had a word that I used called the shallowness of where America is, of who we've become.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to expand on that, because I think if we take a look at where society is today, how politicians are able to accomplish what they do, how politicians are able to do what they do, a lot of it has, in my opinion, to be that we have become and are becoming a more shallow nation. And to which you say?
Well, the question of what kind of consciousness has developed in America is huge. And I would like to share my own little story. When you said shallowness of culture, I had a lot of things that came to my mind because of what my life has brought me. But so I'll explain a little story about what led me to ask, what the hell is going on? Because the world didn't act like I believed it would act. So here's the story. A lot of this is things that our regular listeners will already recognize, but where it comes from is I had an experience in 1970 which showed me something very, very important, and I think kind of irrefutable, about the story of our species. In particular, it offered an explanation of why human history has been the way it has and why the world is as screwed up as it is. I think I've delivered in our conversations a couple of statements, which I'll just quickly rehearse, which says any creature anywhere on any planet in this cosmos that takes a step onto the path of civilization will be condemned to embark upon a destructive social evolutionary process like the one that has beset human civilization for over the millennia. I think I can prove that. And I likewise believe that my argument, which I've been working on it for a long time, and it holds water. But anyway, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. Now, I think that if people recognized those truths, it would have a transformative effect. When I saw that on a particular day in 1970, it just changed the whole course of my life. It blew me away. I mean, it shook me to my bones. I wept.
It shook you to your bones that humanity is better than the humanity you thought it was. In other words, most people are good people.
Well, what shook me to the bones was a combination of I saw what had happened to our species and nobody else had ever seen this thing, which is really important. And it answering the question I've been wrestling with for several years at that point, which is why is the world so destructive? 1968 took me to a new place. But the other thing is I didn't know up that point, I didn't know what to do with my life. I had always been goal directed, but what sense does it make to fit into a world that's out of joint? Well, I got an assignment on that day and I worked on it. I got my doctorate. I wrote a 1,600-page dissertation. I got a Ford Foundation grant to turn that big thing into something that could get published. I got it published in 1984 by the University of California Press, who treated it like a big deal. The New York Times gave it a full page. It was a big deal, and I had always envisioned if I could only get this thing out into the culture as I envisioned the culture to be, it would blow other people away too. It would change things. It would have an impact. That's why it was worthwhile to sacrifice a whole lot to get that written. So it gets out there. According to the world that I thought I lived in, something that is compellingly argued, that has big implications if it were true, would challenge the thinking world to either refute it so you didn't have to worry about what it was saying, or accept it, which means you move toward what's been shown to be true, or you keep struggling with it. But the world didn't do any of those things.
No, of course not.
Well, you say, of course not. I thought that I had fulfilled my promise when I got the book out there so well. Esquire magazine put it out there. Oh, it was great to be out of the wilderness and no longer quite the nobody. And, it was, and I thought that it was going to happen. People were getting exposed to it. It was no longer this thing that I had failed to get out into the world yet. But then they don't refute it. They don't accept it. They don't struggle with it. And when I saw that it had gotten out there, but then just been ignored,
that's the word. That's the word, ignored. And there's a lot of, when do you ignore it? A shallowness creates ignorance, but continue.
Okay. Well, so I've had, what is it? So like by the early 90s, I recognized that this thing had made its little splash and then disappeared into the depths. Yeah. And so I've had a long time to ask myself, well, why is that? What is that? Well, I can see how I got to my beliefs. I grew up with a father who was always had intellectual integrity. I thought that the thinking world would respond the way my father would. But I also think that there was a difference. I looked around, I've been aspiring to be, I'd like people to take on what I've put together, the way people, when I was growing up, took on people like Karl Marx with his systematic way of understanding human history, and Freud, who was the guy that I, as a late teenager, I got to know his thinking, and it was an important part of my thinking. I wanted to get out there, but and it wasn't happening. And then I noticed it wasn't as though other people's ideas, about big ideas, big picture ideas about how to understand the human world were getting adopted, and mine wasn't making the grade somehow. Nobody, Freud and Marx had fallen out of favor. They were no longer they no longer had followings in the world, except very fringe in both cases. But there wasn't anybody else. And that's what got me thinking about when you said the shallowness of culture. I've been entertaining the idea, which seems to be true, that one of the ways in which our culture is shallow is we don't seek a big picture way of grasping the whole ball game, the human drama. Like when I talk about the crisis in America, it's always part of a whole human drama that's been unfolding since the beginnings of civilization. I draw the lines. I've been cultivating this picture. It's all part of the same thing. And it's part of helping us see what the nature of the battle is and seeing what the nature of the battlefield is. And I think it's really important that we don't just see the news of the day, but we see the big picture. And yet, there are people who are thinkers in our time. I could list a few, but they're not at the magnitude of what Freud or Marx did. They're not trying to show a whole big vista, and whether accurately or inaccurately, what both of those guys declared showed something that you could apply to the human story in general, whether it's class conflict in the case of Marx or the role of the unconscious in the case of Freud, interpreting Greek myths and such.
Let me interrupt you for a second, because I think you're hitting on something that sometimes I wonder, it's right in front of all of us and it's not seen, right? You mentioned about the provocative and probably fact-based nature of, let's say, Freud and Marx and others. And what did we want to occur to those? We wanted those to fall out of favor. We wanted to be able to ignore those things because
why would we? I mean, why wouldn't we want to have a? I mean, I don't buy either of those pictures.
You buy your own. You buy your own. And why do you buy your own? Because it makes sense. Okay, to you it makes sense. To me it makes sense.
But why wouldn't people want the world to make sense?
That's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. If we start thinking not just for the now, if we start having critical thoughts, what makes this happen? What allows this to happen? How does humanity behave instinctively in a natural? It creates a problem from something you speak about all of the times, and that is the gangster. There are a lot more of us than there are the gangsters.
Oh, okay, so you're saying, I think what you're saying is that the gangster force.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about it as a force, not the. But anyway,
right, got it.
That it has an interest,
right,
in keeping us fragmented in our thinking.
Yes.
So we can't see the force that we need to fight and overcome.
Exactly. And it's obvious. Again, let's forget about your personal ideology. But Karl Marx had a vision. If Sigmund Freud had a vision, you have a vision. And you believe if people were to see the logic behind what you are doing, it'll even if they don't necessarily agree, it'll cause them to think critically. And in the process of thinking critically, just what may they have come up with?
But there's a piece needing to be put in here.
Go ahead.
You and I have agreed that that our inability to see the big picture serves, I will say, the force of brokenness.
Yes.
Okay. That doesn't by itself explain why it is that the thinking world would be disabled or reoriented. I mean,
it does.
Let's say in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, America, the force of brokenness was alive in the world. They always had an interest in keeping people from seeing certain things.
Right.
But nonetheless, people were looking for something that would explain why the world was the way it was, whether it be civilization and its discontents as a way of understanding it from Freud, or the class conflict from feudal to capitalist to proletarian state or whatever. People had an appetite for it. How did it come to be? I mean, are we to say that that the force of brokenness was able to make people unable or uninterested? It's more meaningful.
I think
when you see the big picture.
I think it's a process. I think it was a marginally slow process. I saw last night as I was blogging at about 1 or 2 in the morning. I was watching. You ever heard of a woman's? Her name is Elizabeth Holmes. She was. Oh
yeah, she's been convicted of fraud.
Right. Okay. And you watch Elizabeth Holmes' story, and you talk about learned people, very smart people, both politically and scientifically. The people scientifically knew that what she was talking about really sounded like junk. The people in that had power were concerned about if that junk is true. You just watch how the machination went that this fraud from a girl who started at 19 years old with the fraud, all the way up to her age now, which is 39. I looked at that, and believe it or not, I thought about you and brokenness and the gangster.
Are you saying
her as the gangster? Yeah.
Are you saying that the minds of the people whom she conned manifested some inabilities that are relevant to this conversation?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I think you hit it on the nail. I think you nailed it, because what happens is the way our minds work. Look, it doesn't matter that you're a scholar. You happen to be a scholar who are strong-minded. There are not many scholars that are strong-minded. We have that they'll come out and they'll tell their theories, but if one fights back too hard, they don't lose belief in their theory, but they go ahead and they keep it to themselves.
Can I take this conversation back to me?
Absolutely.
Okay. So here I am. I just turned 77 this week.
Happy birthday. Belated.
I probably have reached at least the halfway point.
There you go.
So I happen to believe my life would be simpler if I didn't. That what I've put together, if it did occupy some significant space in how people in the world think about the human story and the challenges we face, I happen to think it would have a beneficial effect. I think that we would be, and a beneficial effect, I mean, make it improve the likelihood that human civilization will survive the next couple centuries, as opposed to culminating in some kind of self-inflicted catastrophe.
Well, I would say that it's doing that already. I mean, the fact that, I found you and knew about you. So to take it back to the shallowness of the culture, I'm about to take my show on the road in a couple of new ways. And one of them is putting out a series on DailyKos, where I appear regularly as a reasonably well-respected political commentator talking about the immediate situation. And by the way, let me interrupt, folks. He put an article out there at DailyKos that simply went viral. I kind of got some notifications on it, and I said, "Well, guys, I got him first. You guys just are getting the leftovers of what brother Schmookler has to say."
It's the big picture that's my life's mission. I mean, I want to do whatever I can to help American democracy survive, and I've worked on that pretty full time since I saw what we were up against in 2004.
Right.
So that's sort of a...
Hey, Andy, your camera kind of bumped. Yeah, I want to see your picture. Yeah, there you go. That's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When you come too close, the head gets chopped. There you go.
Yeah, that's a metaphor for the whole thing, I guess. But so we're talking about, it could have a beneficial effect. I just, whether anybody else believes it or not, it's that belief.
No, I'm other people. Okay. I'm not you.
Okay.
And I'm telling you that in as much as there is for certain things that I disagree with you on, I think your message is so powerful. First of all, I just got glued to a better human story, because those people who believe in our humanity, who believe we're better than what we look like, I think those are the people that we should be concurrently promoting. Go ahead, sir.
Well, it's interesting. You should focus on that. I'm going to have to think about that. That might be a direction I should take some things. But if the culture is shallow in the ways that you're talking about, that's one obstacle. And I'm about to put this stuff, the best of my ability. I'm working on it in several different ways. Presenting the big picture on DailyKos, where people are there because they're interested in the battles of this moment, which I'm interested in too. So I write about those. But I'm now wanting to show the thing that's my life's mission to show, which is the big picture, the better human story, which even helps us understand and fight the current battle better than we've been doing. So it doesn't mean, oh, let's stop paying attention to this fascistic force that's taken over the Republican Party. Let's understand what it is and where it came from and what its components are and the force of evil that's involved here, that's expressing itself here. That's a function of the forces that we unleashed as soon as we took on the path of civilization, and it was inevitable that we would. I want people to see that that's where our species story has been, and it means we're better creatures than we should have been. It means that we can see more clearly the nature of the challenge we face in saving American democracy and in preventing civilization from destroying itself. It's all part of one big picture, and we can fight and win better if we see it. That's where I'm coming from. How do I get that across to the world as you see it as so shallow?
Well, I tell you something. I have to tell it to you in a short story. And by the way, we're going over today because the conversation is so sweet. Okay, but this is what I actually told. I was on a board of a particular organization where I did a lot of blogging and I wrote a whole lot of notes. And in that note, I would have these headlines that would piss the leaders, the other leaders off. And we'll go into meetings and they'll Egberto, why are you saying it that way? Or why are you doing that? And I said, to get eyeballs. And they said, but that's not what we're all about. To get eyeballs, you're messing with the message. And I said, and then the other part they said is, but you have a title like that, and when you read the story, it is so it's nothing like the title, and it tells you so much. And I'm like, it is like the title. It just got their attention to go ahead and be willing to digest what was given. And that is the magic. You asked, how do we get a shallow people to start listening to us? You go meet them. In other words, you are not shallow. And if you stay in your lane, you are only going to meet people in your lane, people with your level of intellect, people with your level of unshallowness. To be able to get to those others, you have to meet them where they are. And that is the most difficult part of it all.
I want to start with, I write these things up, and I'm writing a 20-minute sermon that I'll probably be going around the country and giving to like Unitarian churches. Mm-hmm. I used to do that kind of thing in the 80s and the 90s anyway, but I haven't done it since I lived in New Mexico. And mm-hmm. But suddenly I have something to say, which is kind of the message. As the present title of the thing is, let me get up there. Well, basically, it's got to do with how important it is to see the humans, how the evolutionary perspective gives us a better human story.
I love that. You see, I love that. I think every time, there are times that you keep telling somebody how bad they are or how bad X, Y, Z, and they immediately live up to their expectation. I'll tell you another little quick story with my kid, who is a Black Latina, of course, like her daddy. She went to a school, and there was a time where, she took all AP courses, and they were encouraging her not to take these courses. And what I tried to illustrate to other parents, because other parents did follow their lead, and they'll come and like, Berta, my daughter wanted to go into AP, and they suggested that she goes to the regular, standard program. What happens too often in society is either we live up or we live down to people's expectations, or we allow other people to allow us to live down to the expectations they have of us.
Funny that you should talk about expectations, because what I say about why it's important to understand that the ugliness we see in human history isn't human nature writ large. Right. I think that people if they think for a minute, they'll recognize that if that could be proved, that would have a big effect on how we see ourselves.
Interestingly, Dr. Schmookler, let me tell you the reason I adapted the methodology that I adapt with my right-wing brothers and sisters, right? Because if I go into a Starbucks without talking about, hey, I'm your pinko liberal, I'm your pinko progressive, I can sit down and talk to somebody about your kid, about your wife, about the illnesses that they have and all these things. And it turns out like, wow, this guy's a nice guy. Then I say, hey, I'm a liberal. I said, you're what? You've got horns, So I've learned I've proven what you've preached for quite some time now.
Let me say something about my limitations, because I'm willing to claim what I've done with my strong suit.
Right.
I know what I've done, but I feel a couple of limitations right now, and I'm grateful to you because I think you're helping me overcome them by your role in the conversations. One is, I'm a very march to your own drummer kind of a guy.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, for example, who's a therapist, he's able to form himself in a whole variety of ways to be with a whole variety of people. I'm more of the cast in a particular mold,
right,
kind of a guy. And so I can listen to people and understand people empathetically, but I don't meet people on their territory. I meet them on mine. And another thing which limits me is that I'm a product of a different era.
True.
I'm watching a movie called that I got on my DVR called Friends with Benefits.
Yeah.
It's kind of a sweet movie, but it's also kind of shocking. I feel like, am I watching this? Am I watching You've Got Mail, or am I watching porn? And I realize that there's a generation out there watching this movie that's not having the problem I have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the old fogey aspect of things, but I don't really, I don't feel like that. I'm intellectually trained.
Right.
And by a brilliant father and the best education you can get in America, and was always highly motivated. I made of myself everything that I could. And what it is a holistic social visionary thinker coming out of the Jewish tradition in some sense.
Andy, let me tell you something, and I say this with a lot of respect. And I say that, I love you, I like you, all that good stuff.
Did I do something bad just now?
No, you did not. You did at all. But what I'm saying is you are just a creature of who you are. Okay.
Yeah, and I see the limits.
Let me finish. Let me get the shocking part that I want to tell you.
Yeah,
you are a creature of who you are. You happen to be this white guy who has always who never had to compromise. If you take a listen to what you're saying, which I'm saying there's nothing wrong with that, and I would like to be this.
I want people to know that I had to compromise in that I never made a living.
I know, but what I'm trying to say, what I'm really trying to say here is more so than most, and you in our conversation that is very evident, right? You don't have to, you want people to play on your field and all of that, and that's not a bad thing. Let me get what I'm trying to say, because this is not a critique. This is a reality. This is not a critique at all. This is just how things have evolved in this country for the sake of people. Now, in this conversation that we have, right, we are able to expand the horizons of all kinds of folks that are listening to us. Because in the areas where, because of history, you are not used to, let's say, doing certain kinds of compromising or whatever, others are. And in that in that machination of people with these different points of view, etc., your message as well gets through. And that's why, I know who you are when I said, hey, let's do this series. And I really enjoy them because, again, there is so much to learn, and there's so much that someone like you adds to this entire discussion. And I love the title, A Better Human Story.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said earlier had to do with being better creatures than we thought ourselves to be. When I first wrote the Parable of Tribes, I emphasized how it was, in a sense, humbling news that we have not been the masters of our own destiny, that we have been the victims of forces that we unwittingly unleashed. So I announced it as humbling news, building off of what Freud said. Copernicus showed us that we weren't at the center of the universe. Mm-hmm. Darwin showed us that we weren't a special creation. And now, says Freud, I show us that we're not masters in our own consciousness. And then I said, and now I show the bad news, the humbling news, that the course that we've taken in civilization has not been an expression of us and of our choices. It was something we fell into that we couldn't avoid.
And go finish your thought. I'm sorry.
So then, in recent years, when I came up with A Better Human Story, I came up with this thought, which I think, which you're directing me back to also, which is that bad news, in a way that we're, this thing's out of control. The human civilization is and always has been out of control. I think that should be written up as a theme in its own. But
don't forget to title it.
Where was I there?
Well, let me tell you where you are, because we are way over time. And what I want people to do is come back for what we are going to talk about, because Andy ended today's conversation in a very important spot in A Better Human Story.
Let me just finish that thought, because you'll like it.
Okay, go ahead.
That I realized that I should talk about the good news there, that we have thought ourselves to be as ugly a species as you would get the impression we were if you watched all the ancient civilizations emerge out of hunting-gathering societies to arrive at the tyrannies and empire building and slavery that we see throughout wherever it showed up. Imagine that if what the good news of saying, that's not who we are. It didn't matter what our nature was. Any creature would have become the same ugly thing.
Dr. Andy Bard Schmookler. We will continue this conversation about who we really are. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Well, I'm grateful to you, Egberto.
All right, folks, let's go to Johnny, who's on the line and was patiently waiting. Thank you, Johnny.
Oh, you raced down the hallway here. Yeah, I can agree with your guest in a whole lot of ways. I'm a little bit more pessimistic about humanity in terms of exterminating itself through any number of means, including and especially nuclear attack, because of the fact that our own president has recently acknowledged or admitted or given up to the idea that there's more likelihood of a nuclear exchange. And then at the same time, we have Catholic nuns who are arrested and put into prison for putting some of their blood on a gate of a facility that houses nuclear missiles. And we have cops in Atlanta who go without consequence for killing a peace activist. Our side, peace activists get beaten, brutalized, imprisoned, while people in Congress who incite riot and violence against others, they get to draw a salary. This is twisted.
That's why, a lot of the series that we're talking about, A Better Human Story, is Johnny, believe it or not, most people are like you. Most people are like me. Most people are like Jack and Howard, good people that are wanting to do right. When you hear Dr. Schmookler talk about the power of the gangster is able to direct many. One of the things that I hope we attain in life is to take the gangster's power that he really doesn't have but is able to exercise away. Faith is, I'm not talking about having faith in changing. I'm talking about changing. In other words, too many of us sit back and just think we have to hope that somebody else gets it done. Hell, I was like that thinking I could do absolutely nothing. And then I said, wait, we have platforms now that we can work with. We have other people that we can interact with. We can decide that we're not going to be our brother's enemy, but realize that what we do have is a common enemy of a very few. And that is what we have to get over. So, Johnny, between now and forever, I am going to positivize you, my brother.
I agree with you, and I also agree with the concept of your friend you're talking to today, that I believe there is room on our side for activists to both take a more active, aggressive approach in addition to reaching out. Because if the other side senses that the only thing we're ready, willing, and able to do is to preach kumbaya like Joe Biden does, or put daisies and flowers in the baited rifles of National Guardsmen, guess what? Then we will lose.
And
so
Johnny, you're absolutely right. Thank you for calling. That is why I love this. Dr. Schmookler has a voice. And if you notice, when he mentioned that he wants folks to play on his field, I said, hey, that's fine. Others are, we have to be like we attack viruses from many different directions. You have a voice. I have a voice. Howard has a voice. Jack has a voice. Everybody's voices compositely makes a difference. Thank you so kindly for calling, Johnny. Let me give Howard and Jack a quick 10 seconds before we close this baby down.
Okay, Egberto. Thank you, Johnny, for calling in. As always, you give us some insight. Very interesting interview you had there. Certainly, we are spoiled with material stuff, and I was thinking to myself, and I certainly am spoiled with my material stuff, too. How about you, Jack?
I'm not spoiled at all.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Hey, well, look.
I love my motorcycles and stuff like that, my little stuff. But I do recognize that materialism does detract from, people's participation in.
Hey, Jack, I'm getting kicked off. You hear the music? Love you guys. My name is Egberto Willies. This is Politics Done Right. And you know how I end this baby. I am what? Out.